she bought a storage unit. The tape inside explains. She bought the storage unit on a wind-pushed Saturday in early October, the kind of day when flags along the frontage roads snapped like polite warnings and the auctioneer's voice carried clean across the lot. The place was called Milepost Storage, just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, a long row of corrugated doors facing a strip of prairie that kept trying to become a parking lot. She was not a flipper by trade. She was a librarian who liked old paper and lost letters. Her name was Leora Penn, and she raised her hand on a hunch when the auctioneer said the original renter had defaulted contents as is, cash only. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2020, that long elastic year that stretched and snapped and stretched again. Leora had a quiet car with a trunk that clicked shut like a punctuation mark. She had a brother named Finch who texted her thrift store photos like fortunes. She had a mother in assisted living who remembered questions but not answers. And now, for $430, she also had Unit B, 17, 6x10 dust inscription on the floor like an abandoned sentence. The auction staff cut the lock. The door went up with a skipped beat rattle. A smell slid out that was not quite mildew and not quite time. The light, sweet rot of cardboard and old leather. Inside, 3 banker's boxes labeled with a hand that pressed too hard. 1 wardrobe box crumpled along one spine. A busted desk lamp with a brass gooseneck shaped like a question about to be asked. A milk crate of records with sleeves that had forgotten how to hold themselves. And on top of everything, as if someone had said it last and with a decision, a small gray cassette player with a built-in speaker and a rectangle of yellow tape across its lid. On the tape, block letters in Sharpie, "Play me first." The wind moved in the alley between the units and made the metal doors talk to each other. Leora crouched in the rectangle of shade, thumb hesitating for the length of one breath, then pressed the play button. At first, there was only hiss, then a rustle that could have been a sleeve or a curtain, then a man's voice testing his own name like a microphone check. "This is Calder March," he said. "If you found this, you probably also found the rest. Please listen to the whole thing before you throw anything away. I am not saving myself here. I am trying to return what does not belong to me." The date is June 23rd, 2003. The place is Driftwood Storage on Route 49 outside Amarillo. I am saying that out loud, so when the tape gets copied and mislabeled, I can still put the world back where it goes. The sound of a chair leg grumbled against concrete. Papers shuffled. A small metronome of tapping began and stopped. The man took a breath that had a weight in it. I fixed pianos for 20 years. Churches. Schools. People with money who thought sound was furniture. In '97, I started keeping a log of every instrument that had a story stuck in it. By story, I mean the thing you hear when the room gets quiet and the wood remembers. Don't roll your eyes. If you have never heard cedar explain itself at midnight, that is not my fault. Leora smiled despite herself. She didn't know why she had nearly laughed. Maybe because the voice was so unembarrassed by its own certainty. She adjusted the little volume wheel, the speaker fuzzed, then settled. "I am recording this in a storage unit for a reason," Calder said. "There is a Baldwin Acrosonic in here with its fallboard down and its keys covered by a towel that used to be jade green. On top of it is a shoebox with the words 'Keep for Jaspers' written in pencil. I took that box from a house that was being cleared in a hurry. I told myself I was keeping it safe. I told myself I'd hand it back when the time was better. That was 8 years ago. The time never got better. It got brighter and louder, and then it got mean, and the box stayed under my bed like a small dog that thinks it has permission. Today, I am putting it where it belongs, which is somewhere a person can choose it or not choose it without me choosing for them." The tape clicked. He continued, "If you are Jaspers, or you loved one, or you know one, please keep what matters and toss the rest. Just know this first. The shoebox contains letters between 2 people who met at night school at Tulsa Community in 1974. Their names were Odell Frost and Evo Jaspers. He was 20 and thought he was already late. She was 24 and tired in a way a person shouldn't be at 24. They wrote like the world was going to let them live wherever they set the words down. The letters stopped just before Christmas, 1976. The reason is not a twist. It is the average tragedy. She got sick and then sicker. He did not know how to write to a sickness that took her mouth away. The last letter is his to her. He mailed it 3 days after the funeral. The envelope came back rubber-stamped, forwarding order expired. It sat in a house for 2 decades until I was tuning the family's Kimball, and they told me to set aside anything sentimental for the dumpster. And you see, I have a dumb belief that paper should be read before it is burned. A gust pushed gravel down the row like a handful of beads. Leora paused the tape and looked into her unit, as if the boxes could confirm this story. She set the player on the wardrobe box and lifted the top of the nearest banker's box. Receipts. Polaroids with the color cooled to a vintage sadness. A folded travel map with lines drawn like veins between Amarillo and Tulsa. The milk crate of records gave up a Carole King sleeve, rumors with a coffee ring, a gospel record from a church in Sepulpa. The cassette player droned a faint motor whine as if it were eager to continue. She pressed play. Ivo, Calder said, shifting into the second person, like someone who has been telling a story too long to keep pretending he isn't inside it. If you're listening, I kept something that was not mine because I thought the world would eat it. I am an idiot in exactly that way. I am also your accomplice now if you want me. In the bottom of the box, you'll find a tape that isn't this one. It is labeled December 27th, and you can guess the year. It is her, Odell. The last night, she felt up to getting her voice into a machine. She didn't tell you because she didn't think the machine could hold the shape she wanted to say to your face. I don't think machines can hold shapes either, but sometimes they keep the outline well enough that a person can fill it in. If you would rather not hear it, don't. Burn it and say a kind word and go make a sandwich. If you would, then sit and be ready to forgive yourself after. Whatever you do, don't listen driving. Ask me how I know. Leora's hands moved before her mind did. She slid the wardrobe box aside and hauled the banker's boxes out into the light. The tape ran. Calder cleared his throat once, then offered one last breadcrumb. I am going to leave this unit with rent paid for 6 months. I'm leaving the desk lamp that looks like it belonged to someone who wanted to read long after the room gave up. I am leaving the Baldwin cupboard, which is disrespectful to instruments and necessary for dust. If you are not Ivo or Kin and you opened this and felt a tug, maybe you are the kind of person who opens doors in museums you're not supposed to open. I can't stop you. But if you take the tape, take the box too. Stories get lonely if you split them. All right, that is me done. I'm going to label this Play Me First and lock up. I will drive to a diner where the coffee tastes like someone loved it an hour ago, and I will not look back. Good night. The tape wheezed to a stop and stayed there with its little spools paused, like eyes that had decided to blink and stuck. Leora ejected it. The cassette was the cheap clear kind with gray hubs, a bite taken out of one corner like a mark from a nervous jaw. She set it aside carefully and went to work on the shoebox in the bottom of the second banker's box. There it was, the penciled Keep for Jaspers, in a hand that had tried to write neatly when it wanted to run. The lid resisted at first with that dry hiss cardboard makes when it has sealed to itself. She slid a fingernail under and lifted. On top, letters in a stack, rubber band fossilized to a brittle loop, and then snapped quietly when her thumb found it. Dates in the corners. 1974 in April. 1975 with summer still in the stamp. A ticket stub to a cinema that no longer existed. A brochure for night classes with prices that looked like jokes now. And at the bottom, as promised, a cassette slid against the rough cardboard and knocked once. Leora lifted it out. The label was crooked. December 27th, the year written very small. 1976. Her hands were not shaking, but they were listening. Her car's dash still had a tape deck because she had refused to trade it in for a newer something that didn't have teeth for music. She almost walked to the car. Then she stopped because a voice in her head sounded suspiciously like Calder's caution about driving and hearing a thing that bent your understanding of what sound can hold. She looked around for an outlet. The storage office would have one, but the manager had retreated with his clipboard and his coffee to the room with the little TV. Leora picked up the cassette player. A miracle. It had batteries. She grinned at an object in 2020 that ran on forgiveness and double A's. She set the old player on her trunk, fed the tape in with a care the machine rewarded by accepting it smoothly, and pressed play. Hiss, the slow wind of old magnetism waking. A distant clink like a glass set on tile. Then a woman's voice that arrived the way snowfall sometimes arrives in a drought, soft first, then unapologetic. Evo Jaspers, she said, you told me never to record because I try to edit my life when there is a red light. I am ignoring you because not everything we decide together should stay decided. It is the 27th. Christmas is done with me. I am done with it. I wore the scarf you bought, even though it makes me look like a librarian from a story where the librarian unbuttons her blouse at the end and chooses a wild life. Stupid scarf, perfect scarf, I loved it. I am sitting at the kitchen table, and I can hear the refrigerator think. You always say refrigerators think too much, and look how the milk tastes of thinking. The voice was not shaky. It had the kind of steadiness that is not bravado, but a gift a person gives to the people listening. Odell breathed in as if drawing a line she wished were longer. I am not going to make it to spring, she said in the tone of someone admitting they are not going to make it to a movie on time. Nothing tragic in my voice, love. I am trying to keep the tragedy in my hands on this table. I want to put them down gently so they do not wake anyone. I am not afraid. That is not bravery. The body is tired, like a clock, that has been asked to keep time for a dance that went one song too long. What I am is greedy. I want more of you. I want to watch you learn how you stand when there is a child at your hip and a skillet on the stove and a song in your head. I want to hear your temper forgive your mouth. I want to finish organizing the Broken Spine novels at the bookstore, even though we both know I only work there to borrow sentences and put them back. But a person doesn't get to want and get in the same breath. Leora leaned against the car and closed her eyes for a count that surprised her with its length. The lot around her had its own noise, the rattle of a chain on a flagpole, a truck lugging in second, a crow that had lost its patience with something on the fence, but the voice made those sounds pat themselves on the head and promised to be quiet. You asked me once what I wanted you to do if I left first, Odell went on. I said remarry and be happy, because that is what you are supposed to say if you do not want to be accused of clutching. I have a different answer now, and I am allowed to revise because I am still here with breath in my pocket. I want you to put a box in a place where a stranger could find it, with instructions that say, take what you need. Not because I think romance belongs in thrift shops, but because the world seems to pass its tenderness along that way. We pay attention to what we do not expect to find. We pick up what someone else set down and we think, oh, I get to decide two lives right now, mine and theirs. It makes us more careful with both. She laughed, that short, violent laugh people make when they almost cry and disagree with their face about it. If you find this after I am gone, congratulations on your snooping. You love me enough to live in my kitchen after my kitchen belongs to dust. You love me enough to put your ear to a machine when it would be easier to put your head in a pillow. I will not say do not be sad. Be as sad as you please. Be ridiculous with it for a while. Wear your sadness out like shoes on a long walk, and then when they have holes in them, throw them away and go barefoot for a month. But promise me you will buy new shoes when the weather turns. Promise me you will keep a stove fuel canister in your car because someday you will offer it to a stranger at a trailhead, and this will be the way the world returns. Something I am stealing right now by leaving. The tape made a small, warbly sound as the tension shifted, then continued. Listen to me bossing you around, Odell said, fond exasperation in the syllables. I am going to put this tape in a box with letters you never saw. You called me a magpie when we met, and look, all I have collected are words and ticket stubs. The letters are mostly me, because you hated writing on paper that did not have music staves, and you did not think words would stay put if they could not sit on bars. The last letter is yours. You wrote it inside your head, and will write it later with a pen. The pen will do its best, the paper will do its best. Here is the part I cannot make neat. I want you to leave the box somewhere you do not own. A storage unit, a church basement, the free shelf in the back of the bookshop. Somewhere a person has to choose to look twice. She paused, and the tape sighed with her. The thing you always say about pianos is in my head, she murmured. That They carry the memory of every hand that asked them to be more than wood. I don't know what I am asking you to be. More than wood, less than a shrine, something that can be picked up and put down without breaking. You are good at that. Your hands know how to pass a thing. The end of the tape came with a soft click, like a door catching. Silence fell with dignity. Leora stood in the concrete wind, the cassette player ticking to itself, and realized she had been holding her breath in a way that made her chest feel like a drawer that didn't want to open. She exhaled and felt the world get its shape back around her. The storage yard's manager had wandered out to smoke and had stopped in the doorway, watching her kindly from behind his own weather. He raised his chin in that American way that means, "Do you need another person, or should I go pretend not to see you?" She shook her head and put her palm on the trunk as if the metal could read it. The letters in the shoebox were not neat. They were fierce. They were church and break room and bus stop and laundromat. They were written on grocery lists and margins of community college handouts and the backs of band flyers. They smelled like every hand that had held them, plus cedar dust and a sweetness that might have been someone's perfume from a life that had learned to be generous with its molecules. Leora read the first one, standing there in the wind, and then had the sense to stop. Some reading needs a table, a glass of water, and a chair that learned patience. She loaded the car with a librarian's Tetris, slid the cassette player into the passenger footwell where others might put a tiny dog, paid the auction manager who counted cash with a resigned gratitude, and drove to the house where nobody waited for her, the kind of vacancy that makes room for new things and also makes the old ones echo. Night arrived in the square way it arrives in October on the plains. Leora made tea and wrapped her mother's Afghan around herself in a way that would have made her mother tut with approval. She set the shoebox on the kitchen table and arranged the tapes and letters like she was about to catalog them and would not be punished if she took her time. She allowed herself 3 letters, then the rest tomorrow. It became 4, then 5, then midnight, then 1 in the morning with the lamp glass warm and the tea cold. Odell wrote like a sparrow sings, plain and suddenly cruel with truth. I have not learned how to trust a day that stays good, she wrote in early summer. And then, in late autumn, I am practicing believing you when you say soup counts as dinner. She wrote about the bookstore where old men argued kindly about baseball and pretended to forget to leave so they could be told to stay. She wrote about the night school classroom that smelled like pencils and tired. She wrote about a piano in a church basement with 2 keys that hung back like shy children, and the way Ivo tuned them like he was begging the room to promise to be itself. Ivo appears in the margins of the letters. The way the person a letter is written to appears without ever entering the room. He is funny the way people are funny when they are not trying. He is a fixer of everything except his own habit of leaving tools where he used them last. He wants a straight answer from the future and refuses to ask the question politely. He plays blues in E and refuses to apologize. He brings home oranges when money says no because the taste of an orange is the opposite of a mistake. The last letter was his, and Leora saved it for the last. Don't make it tidy, she told herself, and read it anyway with a kind of fear that felt like jumping into water she already knew was cold. Odell, he wrote, the loop of his J from her surname cutting clean across the top line. Today, the mailbox understood time better than I did. It gave me back the envelope I had paid to send. I am grateful to a thing that has no mouth. I am writing this in the room where you laughed at me for liking a rug with so many flowers it looked like the rug was trying too hard. The rug is trying less hard without you. Everything is. I put your scarf on the back of the chair you always refused to let the cat sleep on, and the cat sat there for an hour, mad as a relative. I do not know how to be a person. Yesterday I did, and I expected to today, and look, I will try again tomorrow, because you made me promise to be stupid with trying. I am putting a shoebox where the world can trip over it. If a stranger finds it, I hope they are the kind who is brave enough to open things that are not theirs and gentle enough to put them back. I hope they write to tell me so I can stop pretending the box is a secret and call it what it is, a return. He had signed only Ivo and then, smaller, forgive me for not getting there in time for the last joke you told that wasn't funny. I would have laughed if you had asked me to, but I am glad you didn't ask me to. Leora slept in the chair with the Afghan around her shoulders and the tape player on the table like a small guardian that had learned to keep watch without being asked. Morning came with a plainness that felt like a blessing. She woke, poured new tea, and wrote on a note card with firm letters that made the pen behave. To anyone named Jaspers connected to Odell Frost. Please call. Then she paused, took a breath, and replaced the word call with write. She did not know why until later, when the answer came folded in an envelope that smelled like someone's drawer. She found Ivo in the only way some people can be found now, by a trail of mentions that led to an obituary that did not brag. He had died in 2011 in a house where the cat had once slept on a chair. The obituary had the names of a sister and her two sons, a line about the instruments he had tuned for churches that might not have known what generosity costs, and a sentence that made Leora grip the paper. Survived also by the music he never got to write and the people who played what he fixed. The sister lived in Ponca City then. A search produced a different address in Bartlesville now. Leora wrote the note card anew and set it under a magnet on her refrigerator to stare back at her while she did dishes and decided if it was her place. 2 days later, she mailed a letter with the caution and audacity of a person who has to cross a room to hand a stranger back their own past. She included a copy of Calder's label in the corner because she wanted to prove that intention can be inherited. She waited. Waiting learned her name and sat down in her kitchen with its patient lamp. In a week and 2 days, an envelope arrived with a stamp that had been placed on at a slight angle, the way a person with a careful hand becomes human at the last second. The return address said Jaspers, and Leora sat down on the rug and read with her back against the pantry door. Dear Miss Penn, it began in a slanted script. My name is Anza Jaspers. I am Ivo's niece. I do not know how you got my address, but if you did it politely, I will thank you instead of yell. My uncle used to say, if you make a thing and put it in the world, you do not get to decide how it travels. I am relieved he is right. I know about Odell because I am named after her. He told my sister and me her story when we turned 12 so we would not confuse romance with rescue, and he told it again when we turned 20 so we would not confuse grief with identity. He had a box. We never saw inside it. He kept it under his bed like a grudging god. When he got sick, he told me there was a man named Calder who once did a kindness and a theft at the same time, and that someday the box might return the slow way. If it came, he wanted me to write back to the person who carried it, so I am writing. Tell me what you have. Tell me what you want me to do. If this is a joke, I will forgive you, because it would not be a funny one. Leora wrote back with copies of the first pages, careful not to let her own hunger make her rude. She offered to drive. Anza wrote back the next day with a time and a pot roast menu, as if there were no other way to do this than to feed someone. The drive to Bartlesville took the length of an album and a half, which is not how a librarian measures time, but this time it was. The clouds lay low and thin like a sheet pulled over a lamp. Leora parked in front of a house with white trim that looked like it had been painted by a person who knows how to steady a brush by leaning against the ladder. The door opened before Leora knocked. A woman in her 40s stood with her hands already out, not for an embrace, but for a receipt that weighed more than the shoebox. Behind her, a man waved from the kitchen. The smell of onions and thyme made everything gentler. Anza was the kind of person whose face tells you 50 stories before her mouth says one. She took the box and set it on the table and did not open it for a full minute. Then she did. Her mouth moved, a little, not because she was trying to speak, but because a person's lips sometimes learn to read when their eyes cannot keep up. They listened to the tape at the table with hands flat on the wood, not because anyone asked them to, but because it felt like a way to offer stillness to Odell's voice. When the part came about being ridiculous with sadness and wearing it out like shoes, Anza laughed the small laugh of a person who recognizes the flavor of the advice. He said that, she murmured. He said it like he was inventing the metaphor in front of us, and I have a tape of the original. The room held that sentence like it was catching something fragile. They ate pot roast with pieces of potato that had learned the taste of everything else in the pan. They drank coffee that was new enough to forgive any conversation. They opened the box and took out letters with their hands, like museum workers without gloves. They spoke names like they were calibrating a piano, tuning each syllable until it answered back. That night, Leora drove home under a sky that pretended to be empty and was not. She left the radio off so the car could hear what the night was doing. She slept and dreamed of a storage unit that kept changing its door color, and every door she opened was a different past returning itself. She woke with the taste of dust in her mouth and did not mind. In the weeks that followed, the box lived a second life in a house that understood how to host it. Anza read a letter a day out loud at the table with the window cracked and the dog asleep under her feet. She wrote Leora small updates. Today I learned how Odell laughed at my uncle's fear of oranges. Today I learned that night school used to smell like chalk and resolve. Today I learned that a person can fit a year inside a paragraph and still find room for the weather. Calder's name became a project. They wanted to thank him and did not know how to find his breath in the web. Leora tried phone directories from Amarillo with her librarian stubbornness. She found 3 Calder marches that were not him and one who had moved 2 years prior with no forwarding address. She found a piano tuner's business listing with a disconnected number. She turned to a stack of clippings and found, in a small column with a blurry photo, a mention of a memorial for a Calder M in a church that had bad lighting and kind carpet. The date was 2007. The photo showed a pair of hands holding a felt strip and a tuning hammer. The caption did not brag. A life, it suggested, that had done work and left the room better. Anza wrote a letter anyway. She wrote it as if it were going to be read out loud to a person who could not afford to be bothered unless the bother was beautiful. She mailed it to the church. She mailed one to the storage facility in Amarillo in case anyone there had inherited the story. She put one in a book at the free library on her block, tucked into a copy of a novel nobody seems to want when they need it and everybody wants when they have room. She addressed one to no one, put no stamp on it, and tucked it in the shoebox under the letters. In December, Snow performed its first attempt, failed, and tried again with a more persuasive voice. Leora went to visit her mother, who held her hand, and asked her what year it was, with a tone that admitted timelines are slippery now. Leora said it aloud, 2020, and then, when her mother smiled at the neatness of the numbers, Leora added, "It is also Tuesday afternoon and you like soup." Her mother nodded, satisfied by specifics. Leora read to her from one of Odell's letters. Her mother, who had always loved women who refused not to be clever, laughed once and said, "Tell her to write more." "I'll tell her," Leora said, and did not correct the tense. On the last day of the year, a small package arrived on Leora's porch in weather that could not decide whether to rain. It was wrapped in brown paper with string, old-fashioned on purpose and not by necessity. The return address was a music shop in Amarillo that smelled when she opened the door of rosin and hope. Inside the box, a cassette labeled in a different hand. It said simply, "Driftwood." Then, a date in 2003. A note was tucked in. "You do not know me," it read. "I run the counter at the place where Calder used to buy strings cheap and swear under his breath that the new strings had no patience. We found this in a drawer where the receipts go to forget their names. He left it here the week the storage unit auctioned off his things. He told me to hold it for a person who would ask nicely. No one did. Maybe you are that person." She put the tape into the player with a care that made the table hear it. The hiss began like a tide. Calder's voice arrived. Older or tired, she couldn't tell. He spoke as if he had skipped the first parts he usually said because he felt he owed a different kind of sentence. If this is Leora, or Anza, or someone else kind who made room for a box to travel, listen. I wanted to write a clever instruction for how to put things back. I do not have one. The closest I have is this. When you find a story mid-sentence, do not add your name to the end like a signature. Put your name small in the margin as a witness. Then hand the page to the person whose life it is and let them choose their own pen. He laughed softly, like a man who had decided to stop scolding himself and was enjoying the quiet. The Baldwin in Unit B-17 has a hairline crack in the bridge that will not keep it from speaking if someone loves it anyway. Pianos are like that. People are like that. You will think you have to fix the crack to deserve the music. You do not. You will think the crack is the point. It is not. The point is that the thing still says what it came to say. The tape ended without drama. Leora sat in her kitchen with the shoebox open and the lights soft and the winter outside, pretending it would not ask for more heat. She took out Odell's last tape and listened again, not to study, but to keep a promise to let a voice use the room. She held the letters that had traveled across years, and storage fees and dust and a man's guilt. She smiled down a hallway of time toward a piano she would never see. In February, Anza sent a photo. It was the Baldwin, its towel folded and placed properly, its fallboard up, a vase of eucalyptus on the far end because some leaves talk quieter and longer than flowers. The caption said, "It holds tune better than it should." Anto would have called that grace. The next photo was a child's hand, Anza's daughter, pressing middle C like a doorbell. The next, a dog asleep under the bench. Spring learned its way up from the soil. Leora took the empty cardboard from her unit to the paper recycling, and the man there told her his mother had kept a box of napkins with love notes on them that the family found when the house had to forget them. People put thoughts anywhere, he said, and laughed a little as if proud of humanity's mess. She kept the cassette player. She kept the first tape that said, "Play me first," and the second that said December 27th because some objects become addresses. She kept a copy of one letter that had a sentence she recited on days when the library had more books than hands and more requests than hours. The sentence was Odell's, and it said, "I do not write to be wise. I write to leave a door open in case someone needed that exact door today." On a June morning, with thunder stacked like books no one had time to read, Leora pulled into milepost storage for the last time. She slid her unit door up, empty, except for the desk lamp that curved its brass neck, and asked if she was sure. She plugged it in and turned it on, and the light made a small pool on the concrete like a confession. She left it on for a minute because objects appreciate ceremony even when they pretend not to. Then she turned it off, marked the unit clean on the clipboard with a pen attached by a chain, and dropped the key into a mouth that had swallowed thousands before. On the drive home, she passed a church sign that had not changed its advice since she was small. Be kind. Everyone is fighting a hard battle. She would have rolled her eyes at 12. She nodded at 40. At a stoplight, a man held a cardboard square with letters that tried to be neat. "Need help," it said, and then smaller. "Not a bad man, just a broke one." She handed him the rest of her change and a bottle of water she had known would be asked of her eventually. His thank you had the shape of a person accustomed to sudden doors. Years later, when her mother's memory folded itself like a map and slipped into a drawer that did not belong to any room, Leora took the box of letters to the assisted living and read them aloud on Tuesdays. Not all of them. Some are private and stayed private. Enough that a circle of women who had once been harsher with themselves than they deserved sat a little easier in their chairs and made the kinds of noises women make when a sentence lands where the body keeps its truest things. One afternoon, a woman who seldom spoke said softly, "Put a box in a place where a stranger could find it," and then laughed like a girl about to run. If you are listening to this story, there is probably a door near you. A cupboard, a glove compartment, a drawer that has learned patience by becoming cluttered. Somewhere in your town, there is a shelf where someone has left what they could not keep, and someone else will take what they did not know they needed. If you have a tape player, wind a tape with your finger and feel the old physics still answer. If you only have your voice, use it in a room at 2 in the morning and see if the wood answers. If you have a box, consider putting it where a stranger could find it. Write on the lid in pencil so the world knows it can edit. There was no twist here. No ghost in the unit except the ordinary one that lives in paper and insists on teaching us how to carry each other a little farther down the hall. The man who took what was not his did not profit. He apologized. The woman who wrote did not survive long enough to call it a memoir. She survived long enough to call it a door. The man who loved her grew old and kept tune. The people who came after learned the shape of falling in love with strangers and the more difficult shape of giving the thing back. And so, if it is late where you are and the house has stopped making its usual noises, Pour water into a glass and notice the sound it makes when it hits the bottom, hollow turning to full. Think of a box under a bed. Think of a storage unit with a label you can't resist. Think of a piano with a hairline crack that still sings like itself. Think of a sentence in a letter that arrives in a year you needed it, from a person who never knew your name and said it anyway by accident. Then stand, walk to whatever door you have, and leave it open for one slow, careful minute, just long enough for someone who needs exactly that door today to find their way through. The babysitter heard a voice. Don't answer the door. The first knock came at 8:53 on a rain-polished Saturday in late October, the kind of night in Portland, Oregon, when sidewalks shine and porches feel closer to the river. The house on Birch Hollow Court sat half a block from a small park that still carried the day's damp laughter. Inside, the dishwasher murmured, and a kettle tried to be brave. The babysitter stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, listening because something in the sound at the front of the house asked to be listened to. The knock was polite, then it wasn't. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Isla Marin, 19. Art student, commuter, weeknight sitter for families who liked the way she paid attention. She had a way of noticing and then not needing to say what she had noticed. 2 children slept upstairs in rooms that smelled like clean cotton and a little of crayons. Oren, 5, a collector of sticks, and Juniper, 3, a thumbsucker who dreamed with her hands still resting on the bed rail as if the world might roll. Their parents, Elowin and Cormac Pike, had left at 7:15 for a long-promised dinner with friends on the east side. The year was 2016, when doorbells had learned to film you and phones hummed even when you wished them quiet. Isla had arrived early because she liked the first hour best when the house met you and you met it. The Pike's place had bones from the 1930s and confidence from a do-it-yourself remodel. A deep porch with a swing, pine floors that told the truth when the humidity rose, a narrow staircase that gave out a soft warning at the third tread. The front door had a knob smooth with history and a deadbolt that made a good, finished sound. Someone had left a bowl of apples on the kitchen island and a note in Elowin's looping hand, "Help yourself to anything except the chocolate chips." The note had a smile drawn like a quick breeze. There was also a line at the bottom that felt like it had been added while standing up. "If someone knocks and we're not back yet, don't answer." That line had made Isla breathe out through her nose, amused. Then the weather settled in, and the streetlight outside made the rain look like it had purpose, and she read the line again without amusement and put it into the pocket in her mind where she kept instructions that were probably not overcautious. The first knock came, then the doorbell. The chime had been replaced during the remodel and sounded like an idea of a doorbell rather than a doorbell itself. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isla glanced at the hallway. The front camera should have sent her phone a picture, but her phone sat face down on the counter as an experiment in being a better person. She lifted it. No alert. No snapshot of a porch visitor wet with evening. She opened the app anyway. The screen showed a frozen image from 2 hours ago when the delivery driver in a yellow slicker had left a cardboard box and made a joke to the camera about swimming away. She touched the screen to wake it. It refused. The second knock came, not loud, but certain. She heard a hush behind the sound, no traffic for that moment, no neighbor's laugh, the rain taking a breath. "Coming!" she called, and heard the word bounce off the door and regret its volume. She crossed the living room, passing the lamp with the heavy base and the stack of picture books Elowin had left, lined up for bedtime like a plan that had already succeeded. She stopped 3 steps from the door, where you can still see the whole threshold and also the 3 framed photos on the wall to the right. Pike family on the Oregon coast, Pike family at a pumpkin patch, Pike family on a couch in this very room, elbows touching. The peephole showed dark. Not the dark of a coat, too close. The dark of rain pressuring the lens. She tilted her head to the side window, the one with the glass etched in a pattern of leaves. A shape stood on the porch, too close to see contours. Tall enough to be adult. Still, she thought of families who send a neighbor to drop off a sweater. of packages misdelivered, of jokes. She reached up, fingers on the deadbolt, and then the voice came from the stairwell behind her, even and close, a whisper and not a whisper, a way of speaking that used the room more than it used the air. Don't answer the door. Isola stopped moving. The words had come from the landing, or the old heating vent in the hall, or the part of a house where stair and wall meet and decide to be patient. She turned her head, slow, like a deer deciding whether the sound belongs to a creak or to a person who has forgotten how feet work. No one stood there. Only the line of light from the kitchen, a run of framed children's drawings on the stair wall, and the slight turn of the banister at the top where a hand likes to pause. "Hello," she said, not loud, not questioning, simply acknowledging the world's habit of speaking up when you have one hand on a lock. Down the hall, the nightlight in Oren's room painted a small boat shape on the floor. She took her hand off the deadbolt. On the porch, the shape shifted its weight. The doorbell chimed again, 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola's phone remained stubbornly uninterested. She felt her scalp fizz, as if the body were sprinkling sugar there. She stepped back 1 foot, then another, until the space between her and the door felt like a sentence with the right number of commas. She set the phone on the entry table and kept her eyes on the door. The shape did not knock again. "Can I help you?" she called, calm. "The owners aren't home." The shape made no answer. The rain decided to be louder for a few seconds, then took its apology and softened. A car passed at the end of the block, and its tires whispered on wet asphalt, then left them again. The shape did not say, "Leave this," or "I'm lost," or "Wrong address." It did not step down the stairs or shift toward the window to try a too close look. It stood. The voice from the stairs came again, almost the same, the almost important. "Don't answer ISO." No one called her ISO except 2 people who were not in this house. Not even Elowen, who preferred full names like a teacher who still missed a chalkboard. The nickname arrived and held. The quiet around it learned how to be heavier. Isola is not the kind of person who does brave for style. She does careful as choreography. She picked up the heavy flashlight from the umbrella stand and felt the weight in her fingers like a vote. She walked backward into the living room, never turning her back to the door until the couch was behind her knees. Then she set the flashlight on its end on the coffee table, ready to throw its beam like a purposeful animal. She tapped the phone awake. Now the camera app sent an alert, but when she opened it, the image from the porch was empty but for rain. A rain curtain, the edge of the porch railing. No shape, no wet footprints on the mat when she zoomed, though that could be the grain of the old wood lying. The house held itself very still. Oren coughed once upstairs and rolled to a new dream. The dishwasher hit its dry cycle and made a small whir, as if about to tell a joke. Isola stood. She walked to the staircase and put her hand on the newel post because sometimes wood is better than a person's breath. She stepped up the first 3 treads, the third giving its soft warning, and peered down the hall. Juniper's door was open, just enough for night to move through. Oren's was open a little wider because he had insisted, recently, that he could hear better if the door learned to be brave, and no one had argued with the logic. "Thank you," she said to the landing. She felt ridiculous. She felt correct. The phone hummed. A text from Cormac, "Running late, dessert took forever. You good?" She typed, "Yes." All quiet. Then after a second, a person knocked. Didn't answer. "All good." He bubbled back a thumbs up and a "let me know if weird." She did not type the lines she could not yet shape. She put the phone in her back pocket and went to the kitchen kettle. Tea might give the house another language to speak in. At 9:11, the sound came again. Not the knock. The dry slide of weight on porch boards. Then a new voice, not in the room and not in the rain. A man's voice on the other side of the door, pitched to be reassuring and succeeding halfway. "Hey there," it called. "Sorry to bug you. My car slid a bit. I'm fine, just could I borrow a phone charger? Mine died." Isola stood very still on the tile by the stove. Charged phones. The sentence wore a coat of sense. It also wore the same coat a story uses when it wants to be invited inside. She felt the stair voice rest itself like a hand just between her shoulders. "Don't answer." "I can call a tow from here," she said. If you tell me your name and plate, I'll call it in. A beat. The rain breathed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on 2 doors down, as if someone there had a similar feeling that night, should know it was being watched. Sure, the voice said, cheerful, hurried. Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'm Kai. Plate is Washington, ZNJ. He trailed. The sound changed as if he had turned his head, as if reading something off a thing that had decided not to help him. Hold up. Hard to see in the rain. Okay, Isola said. She took a pen from the junk drawer. She did not step toward the door. The voice did not finish. The porch boards did the shift sound again, the one a body makes when deciding to step down, then silence, which is a choice. She waited a full minute and then padded back to the front hall, one foot making no more sound than the idea of a foot. Through the etched glass, she could see only the suggestion of a person-shaped absence where rain fell differently. The porch swing moved a breath back and forth, though she had not seen it move before tonight. She put her ear near the wood and did that thing you do against doors you don't mean to open. She listened to the hinge. She heard air. She did not hear breathing. She backed away because she did not owe the door any of the parts of her face. At 9:27, the voice from the stairs came a third time, and now it had a softness that made her throat ache. Don't answer the door, Isola. Okay, she said, and laughed once, not unkind. Okay. She called the non-emergency line. The operator's voice was brisk, then kinder when she heard the children's ages. They sent a patrol car to cruise Birch Hollow Court. The officer rolled slow under the maples, touched 2 fingers to his brim up toward the windows like old practice, then slid away toward the park. He called to tell her he'd found no car in distress, no one walking in rain. She thanked him the way a person thanks another for being willing to be seen doing their job. At 10:09, something touched the back door. Not a knock, the whisper sound of a finger on glass. Isola turned off the kitchen light and let the room become a place where her eyes could do their best work. She stood behind the island and let one breath out, as if teaching her ribs a rule. The finger on glass again. Scrape, gentle. A child in some houses might do that, playing ambush. But the child would laugh or give himself away with breath fogging the pain in a haunted oval. The voice in the hall didn't speak. It didn't need to. Isola aimed the flashlight at the floorboards and thumbed it on. The beam carved a clean white lane across the tile and into the mudroom, up onto the window, where a skin of condensation wavered on the glass like a thought. No face waited beyond it, only the moon in its nearly new mood, and the reflection of her own shoulder shaping into something braver than she felt. The scrape came again. The flashlight beam caught the faintest arc at the level of a hand. She walked a half step closer and saw what had made it. On the outside of the glass, pressed lightly against the pane as if placed, and then hesitated and then not taken away, was a leaf. A maple leaf quilted with rain, stem hanging like a punctuation mark. It trembled and dragged and lifted free. That was all. By 10:45, the children were deep in the kind of sleep that makes a house feel like it has set down a heavy bag. Isola sat in the living room and read 3 pages of a book without hearing a word, then closed it and looked at the door again and felt foolish again for looking at a door. She texted Elowen, no rush, all fine. Their reply came in a minute. On our way, rain slow, be home around 11:15, and wore the sound of people who have begun putting coats on. At 11:19, as headlights turned the corner outside and rain slicked away from tires and the familiar shape of the Pikes' wagon slowed by the curb, the doorbell chimed a third time. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola stood in the hallway, hand on the deadbolt, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, the wagon door closed. Cormac ran up the steps in a coat wet enough to laugh at itself. He patted his pockets like a magician who had dropped something essential. He had not rung. The bell had decided to make a ceremony for him anyway. Elowen kissed Isola's cheek in the open doorway and apologized to the night for taking their time. Cormac did a father's walk down the hall to glance into his children's rooms, even though he had been told they were sleeping. Isola told them the short version. A knock, a voice asking for a charger, a patrol car that had been kind. The line on their note, she had obeyed in a way that made the marrow in her wrist feel hot. Elowen's mouth went still. Not hard, still. She looked toward the stairs like a person checking if water had been left running in an upstairs bathroom. Thank you, she said. I should have told you more about that line on the note. It felt like telling too much would make it silly, but I should have told you. I heard a voice, Isola said, careful as she said it, ready to be believed, ready to be joked with. From the landing, it told me not to answer. It knew my name. Elowen closed her eyes and nodded once. Okay, she said. Okay. They made tea. Cormac sat on the arm of a chair like a man who cannot bend himself small enough to fit back into an ordinary evening. Elowen told the story the way you tell one when you have lived with it long enough to know where its corners are. 2 winters before, she said, on a night when the river lifted itself and tried on a deeper voice, a man had walked the neighborhood knocking on doors asking for help. When people opened, he asked to come in and make a call, and if they stepped aside, he would cross the threshold with a speed that felt like another person had told him to hurry. Police had found him at the park pavilion where he had been sleeping rough, talking to a friend only he could hear. He never hurt anyone, Elowen said, but the nights after that felt like a door with a hard-to-find key. 2 weeks later, Cormac said, picking up the part he needed to say, we were here with a sitter, not you, a college kid named Pike, no relation, and something similar happened. Knock. Voice. He started toward the door, and Juniper, who was barely 2, sat up and said clear as a broadcast, don't answer, Daddy. She was barely speaking in sentences. She said it right. My mother's voice used to say it to me when I would go to the door for anybody. Something about the way Junie said it. It sounded like my mother and not like my daughter, and also like my daughter anyway. I didn't open the door. We watched through the side glass. There was nobody there. The bell chimed again. And then, Elowen added, last spring, when we were packing for a visit to my sister's, the doorbell chimed at 2:17 in the morning. Twice. Cormac checked. No one. Junie sat up and said it again. Don't answer the door. We changed the batteries in the chime. We changed the camera. We got smarter about being dumb. But the voice, it comes when it needs to. And she sleeps through it now. We hear it and we listen to it, and then we don't tell anyone because the world doesn't know what to do with a family in a sentence. They laughed softly, a release. The kettle sighed. Rain found a new tempo along the gutters. Isola told them about the man who had used the name Kai and about the way the shape had filled the porch and then been only Rain when she asked questions. She said the nickname the voice had used for her and watched Elowen's face widen in a slow astonishment that contained no fear. It knows, Elowen said. It knows who it needs to keep. They did not turn the story into an advertisement for another religion. They put the house back in order. Isola took the extra bills Cormac offered only after he insisted 3 times. She put on her jacket, damp from fear she didn't call fear, and stepped out onto the porch with them. The porch looked like any porch. The swing creaked because swings are built to do that, at least a little. The streetlight watched their car for a second, then got bored. Elowen reached for Isola's hand and squeezed, once, like a benediction you don't have to keep. On the drive home, the wipers kept time for a song Isola wouldn't have recognized if it had been played for her on a better night. She went under the overpass, where a man with a shopping cart had built a small palace of pallets and hope. She went by the open all-night grocery, where the cashier sells soup to people whose apartments never learned to hold heat. She went by a block of houses where the windows showed families still awake and not sorry. At a red light, she lowered her window and let the rain reach all the way in and touch her cheek, and then she rolled it back up and laughed, because the world had not insisted on being only one thing. The voice didn't follow her. It stayed with the house that needed it. Weeks went by without another knock at an odd hour. Leaves went to ground, and then to bags, and then to wherever leaves go when they've done their first job. On a Thursday in early December, Isola sat for another family across town and saw, on the neighborhood chat, a thread begin. Did anyone hear a bell twice last night around 2? The comments were predictable, then less so. A woman 4 streets over wrote that her grandmother used to leave a ribbon on the inside doorknob to remind herself not to open for kindness in the exact hour when kindness is most dangerous. A man who taught band at the high school wrote that he lived alone and still heard a voice sometimes when he put his hand on the deadbolt, and it always sounded like a person who had spent the afternoon organizing drawers and would simply not have the mess of a poor decision. Near midnight, her phone hummed. A text from Elowen, a photo of Juniper asleep on the couch under a quilt, toes poking out like arguments. Under it, a simple line. When she was half asleep tonight, she said, "Tell ISO thanks. The thanks is from me too." That winter, the door stayed a door. Spring arrived with a rhythm it was proud of. The voice came twice, each time for Isla, once at the Pike House, and once oddly in a different house where the rule felt the same though the picture frames were new. Don't answer. Each time she didn't. Each time the world failed to end. Each time she thought of how many doors in this country stand between people who need help and people who will offer it and people who mean harm and the harm they intend. She learned something small and, to her, permanent. Safety and kindness are not enemies. They are a ladder. You step to the next rung when it will hold, not before. In late summer, after her semester ended and before the new one began, she took a train to see family in Eastern Washington. In the dining car, a man waved her to the empty seat across from him, the way travelers do when their stories want company, and she accepted. He was older, but not old, wore a ball cap with the logo torn off, and had one of those faces that make you feel remembered. He asked what she did. She said art and children and listening. He nodded as if that were a single profession. He told her he had been a night manager at a motel once, decades back, and how sometimes the night tells you who to open the door for and who to speak to through glass, and how your body knows if you let it be the first expert. He said his mother's voice still visited clear, not spooky, not the kind of thing you put in a movie, and told him the one sentence that she had left him as a tool: don't answer the door, not because you aren't good, because you are. She returned to Portland with a sketchbook full of stairways and kettles and porch swings. She babysat for the Pikes the first Friday of October, a night with dry leaves and a moon that put on a mustache of cloud and then laughed at itself. The bedtimes went easy. The dishwasher hummed. At 9:14, the bell chimed once and stopped. She walked to the door and put her hand on the newel post and waited. The voice did not come this time. The house trusted her to have learned. She didn't answer. Later, when Elowen got home and leaned against the door while she took her boots off and said, "I love my boots and I love taking them off," Isola told her about the single chime. Elowen laughed softly and asked if she wanted pie, and they ate pie in the kitchen with their spoons, making small civilized noises, and the night minding its business. If you want a moral, there isn't one sharp and neat enough to slice bread. There is a sentence that belongs to a particular house on Birch Hollow Court, and maybe to your house too if you need it. Don't answer the door. It doesn't mean never. It doesn't mean be a city made of fear. It means listen for the moment your body tells you the story the night is trying to sell, then say no with enough steadiness that the night has to take its pitch elsewhere. If you are ever in a quiet house with children sleeping like small planets upstairs, and the door learns a new trick with its hinge at a time of night when even helpful people forget how to stand, and you hear a voice that knows your name and the shape of your life, let it be a chain on the inside, not a chain on the world. Make tea. Call for help you trust. Stay in the room with the light. Thank the air when it warns you, even if the thanks feels ridiculous in your mouth. Names will still be names in the morning, doors will still be doors. And you will have kept the lesson the old houses know. Sometimes the kindest act is to hold still while the night tries your latch and finds it true. The babysitter's last text. Who's upstairs? The text came at 9:58 on a wet Friday in early November, the screen lighting the dim kitchen of a craftsman house on Maple Ridge Avenue in the town of Larkspur, Pennsylvania. The babysitter had written only 3 words, spaced as if she had to force her thumbs to move. Who's upstairs? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Her name was Ione Kestrel, a college sophomore who took evening jobs to pay for studio art supplies and a public transit pass to the city. She was a quiet soul with a quick wit, the kind of person who noticed the way rain made halos around streetlights and the way children's laughter changed when they grew tired. Two kids slept under that roof that night, a 6-year-old boy named Briar and his 3-year-old sister named Lark. Their parents, Rowan and Maeve Harrow, had left at 7:15 for an anniversary dinner at a restaurant by the river. The year, if you need to understand the way phones hummed and doorbell cameras watched, was 2019. The house at 42 Maple Ridge was one of those old American stories, built in wood and memory, a deep porch with a swing that complained just enough to be charming, oak floors that spoke out loud when the humidity changed, crown molding thick as a picture frame. At the back, a narrow staircase rose from the mudroom to a short landing, and then up again into the second floor where the bedrooms sat in a row like well-behaved children. At the top of the main stairs, there was a crawl space door that had once led to a linen closet and now led to a barely insulated wedge of attic, hot in summer and sharp with cold in winter, the kind of door that makes a welcome thud when it closes and an unwelcome thud when it doesn't. Before the Harrows left, they did all the small, loving rituals. Maeve set out a plate of sliced apples, a bowl of popcorn, and a note that read, "Help yourself to anything except the scotch." Rowan pointed to the thermostat and said the heat pumps kick on if the temperature dips. Fancy house, but the bones are stubborn. He smiled at Ione in the doorway, hair damp from the drizzle, denim jacket dotted with rain. Text us if the storm knocks the power out. Text us if the kids wake and ask for the song about the lighthouse. Text us even if you think it'll make us look overprotective. It won't. At 7:30, the children were bathed, pajamaed, and nestled into beds that smelled faintly of line-dried sheets. Ione read the lighthouse song twice, and the little girl fell asleep with a hand on the brother's shoulder, a tether strong enough to hold a moon in place. At 8, the dishwasher hummed its modest lullaby. At 8:20, the rain came harder, dropping like a handful of pebbles thrown by a polite intruder. At 8:42, the doorbell camera pinged, announcing a raccoon with ambitions. Ione's phone ticked with messages from a group chat, small bursts of jokes and memes. She answered two and then set the phone face down, because she had promised herself she would be the kind of sitter who watched and listened. She put a kettle on. She chose a mug with a hairline crack because hairline cracks reminded her of river maps. She stood at the back window and watched the alley, where a single streetlight blew a cone of yellow onto the wet blacktop like a candle someone had forgotten to snuff. At 9:21, a floorboard spoke upstairs. It was not the sound of a child rolling over and not the polite pop of wood releasing humidity. It was a stepped-on sound, slow and weight-bearing, forward and then a tiny, deliberate back. Ione took one breath, then another. The kettle clicked off. The house returned to its normal choir. She checked the baby monitor screen. Two small forms slept. The greenish night vision painting dreams onto their faces. She told herself she knew old houses. She told herself wind can make timber say things it doesn't mean. At 9:36, the sound came again, above the kitchen this time, in the hallway between the children's rooms. One step and another. A long pause. Then the faintest scrape, as if someone had scuffed a shoe and then, embarrassed by the sound, tried to rub it out with the sole. The kind of scrape that turns the air thin. Ione lifted the house phone from its cradle because old houses carry old phones like relics. No dial tone because this was 2019 and the landline was a costume. She put it back and picked up her cell. No missed call, no alert from the doorbell camera. She opened the parent's contact, hovered, did not press. First, she would look, she would be careful. She would not give Rowan and Maeve a reason to race home on wet roads unless there was a reason. She climbed the back stairs because they felt less like a stage. Each step was shallow and careful. The rain softened to a hiss. Her breath became a guest she had to host with manners. At the landing, the air grew cooler. She could see down the short hall into the little boy's room, the lighthouse nightlight casting a steerable arc of white. She could see the girl's room door nearly closed, just enough to make a crescent, the way some children like it. She could also see the crawlspace door at the top of the main stairs. It was closed, latch turned. That mattered more than it should have. She waited. Sometimes the house wants to know if you have patience. Sometimes it will reward you with silence. Sometimes it will not. There was a third sound, not a footfall this time, but a breath. Not hers. Not a child's soft, open-mouth exhale, but the kind of breath that pauses at the end like it is tasting the air. It came from the darkness beyond the crawlspace door, except the door was shut. Ione felt the tiny hairs along her forearms confess themselves to fear. She stepped into the boy's room. He slept with his mouth open just a little, lower lip shiny. Good. She stepped to the girl's room. Little Lark had turned onto her stomach, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Good. When Ione moved back into the hall, her eyes caught something at the far end where the light thinned. A strand of damp hair lay across the floorboards, faint as a pencil mark, a single narrow ribbon that did not belong to either child. It glistened. She knelt without thinking and picked it up. Cold. Clean. Long enough to belong to someone grown. She stood up too quickly and steadied herself with a hand on the wall. Her palm pressed into a nail head that had been painted over and sanded down so smooth it felt like a coin. She thought the oddest thought then. If I press that nail in, will the crawlspace door open by itself? She smiled at herself because fear makes even introverts dramatic in their own skulls. She returned to the back stairs, slow and exact, and only when she reached the fourth step from the bottom did she glance at her phone. The time read 9:58. The text she sent herself, as if letting the words exist outside her head could make them smaller, was only 3 words. Who's upstairs? She meant to send it to Rowan, she meant to send it to Maeve, she meant the message as a half-joke with a serious underlayer. But the thumb that had learned to move fast learned the wrong dance. It went to her friend in the group chat, and by the time she realized, the message had already become a tiny flare in half a dozen pockets around town. Her friend replied with, "What are you doing?" and also joking, right? And also put them on speaker. Ione did not reply. She set the phone on the counter face up this time. She took the largest knife from the drawer and then immediately put it back because knives are not courage and courage is not noise. She chose instead a heavy flashlight from the mudroom shelf, the kind that doubles as a hammer. She clicked it on. The beam carved a clean white tunnel along the baseboards. She moved to the bottom of the main staircase now, because if fear wants you to circle, wisdom wants you to cross. The newel post was worn as a handshake, family photographs climbed the wall. A wedding photograph near the bottom showed Rowan in a blue suit and Maeve in a dress with sleeves that looked like light. Higher up, a picture of Briar in a lion costume, nap-flattened mane, grinning with the sincerity only a 6-year-old can manage. Above that, near the top, a framed landscape. The glass reflected the flashlight beam like a lid. Halfway up, she paused. There was that breath again. Not a cough, not a snore. A breath like someone who had been holding still too long and had to remind their body to keep doing the automatic things. The sound came from beyond the last step, in the shadow to the left, where the crawlspace door Saturday. It was closed, latch turned. She aimed the beam at the brass. The metal showed a fog that had not been there a minute ago, condensation, from a mouth that had exhaled near it. She kept her own mouth shut because you cannot take breath back once it is out. The latch moved. It moved too gently to be gravity. It made the tiniest metal-on-metal sigh. Then it stilled, as if the person behind the door had realized they had announced themselves and decided to pretend nothing had happened at all. Ione's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was firm in the way a music teacher's voice is firm when she asks a child to stop tapping the desk with a pencil. I'm a babysitter. The police are on their way. If you are a neighbor who has made a mistake, this is your chance to leave without me seeing your face. If you are not a neighbor, this is your chance to decide to be one. Nothing moved, but the house did a small thing then. It clicked. A sound traveled through the baseboards from kitchen to parlor like a cricket chirp. The refrigerator compressor had kicked on. The world had not narrowed to only this door. She stepped higher. She brought the beam closer to the latch. She did not touch it. She watched a drop of moisture on the brass slide very slowly toward the handle and then stop, held by a force that did not want to be named. From the children's rooms, nothing. From outside, rain. From down the hall, a draft like someone had opened a mouth to speak and then decided not to. She took the phone, thumb shaking now not from drama, but from the body's strange understanding of scales. She typed 911 and the call went through on the first chime. The dispatcher answered with a first name and a county. Ione told that calm voice her name, the address, the fact of two sleeping children, the fact of a locked door with breath behind it that did not belong to the family. The voice said, "Officers are on the way." The voice said, "Stay on the line." The voice said, "Do not open the door." So she did not. She watched it the way you watch a stage when you know the performer is already in the wings. She told the dispatcher every small thing she saw. The latch is fogged, the brass is pitted near the screw head, the paint around the jamb is chipped the way it chips when someone tries to open a door with a butter knife. The dispatcher asked about the kids, and she told her about the lighthouse song because sometimes the answer to a safety question is a story that proves you are paying attention. It took 6 minutes for the first cruiser to roll into the alley, though those 6 minutes ran long like string you cannot find the end of. 2 officers climbed the porch steps, rang the bell softly out of habit, then tried the knob and announced themselves. Ione walked down the main stairs, not taking her eyes from the crawlspace door, unlatched the front door, and stepped back quickly so the officers could enter. Their names were Officer Tamsin Dupre and Officer Hal Moran. They were young enough to still wear the job like a coat borrowed from a bigger relative, and old enough to know when to keep their weapons holstered because children were sleeping. Ione pointed. The hall was framed now by their bodies and the yellow hallway light and the cleaner light of the flashlight. Officer Dupre nodded, raised a hand to let silence accumulate, and then approached the door with a slowness that reminded Ione of a conductor raising a baton before the first downbeat. Dupre put 2 fingers lightly on the latch and did not move it. She bent, eye to the thin seam between door and jamb. She inhaled. She did not exhale for a count of 3. Then she did, a controlled tide. She mouthed one word to Moran. There. Moran moved with that cop-slow speed that reads as kindness until it becomes a tackle. He positioned himself on the knob side. Dupre took the hinge side. They counted without sound. Moran turned the knob and pulled. The door did not open. Dupre drove her shoulder low into the panel, and the old wood decided to be new and gave with a crack that sounded like an ankle breaking far away. The space beyond was small, angled, cluttered, with things families save because they carry stories in them. A fan with no blade, a suitcase with travel stickers that meant Paris had existed once for someone in this house, 3 plastic bins of children's clothes marked in black marker, a broken chair that had not given up, and a person, folded into the angle between floor and pitch, knees under chin, face turned away from the light, hands empty and ready to lie about it. Dupre said, "Do not move." Moran said, "Show me your hands." The person did not show their hands. They lifted their left shoulder like someone about to stand in a narrow coffin, and then realized there was no way to both stand and not be seen. They kept their face turned. A smell came from the small hot space that was not attic smell. It was sweat and wool and rain and a cologne Ione could not name but would recognize for years in crowds and feel a short-lived lightning in her spine. The person finally shifted enough for the light to catch their cheekbone. Smooth, young, the jawline of someone who still believes they can sneak back to the version of themselves that did not make this choice. Dupree reached. The person flinched, then stilled. Moran took the wrists, quick. Plastic cuffs clicked, and Saturday. The person whispered one word so fast and so quiet, it sounded like a sound and not a word. Please. There are nights when a house rearranges what you know about it. There are nights when law and luck arrive at the same time and dress alike so you cannot tell who deserves the thank you. There are nights when children sleep through the loudest noises and wake to the softest ones. Briar woke when Officer Dupre gently asked Ione if the boy had a favorite song she could sing while they stepped this stranger past his doorway and into a world that would be, for the stranger, smaller and heavier. Ione sang the lighthouse song, the boy rolled over, the girl sniffed twice and then reclaimed her rabbit. The name given at the kitchen table later, with the cuffs off and the hands folded around a paper cup of tap water, was Corin Vale. He was 22, a barback at a music venue downtown, a part-time mover for a storage company on the edge of town, a person whose landlord had changed the lock that very afternoon because rent was late again, and who had wandered past the Harrow's house just after 9, watching rain stencil shadows on the porch. He said the front porch light was off, that the back alley light was the kind that made him nervous because it buzzed. He said he had once done a job in this very house, moving boxes after Maeve's mother passed, that he knew the crawlspace door did not always latch if you pushed too hard. He said all this in a way that sounded like memorized lines. Officer Moran left for a minute and returned with a small bag-tagged chain of custody. Inside, a multi-tool with a narrow flathead blade that would fit under a painted jam and lever it without much damage, a pair of cheap cotton gloves, damp, a folded postcard someone had intended to mail, featuring a lighthouse on the coast of Maine, and a note written in pencil that read, "We are well, love you, see you in December." The postcard had not been addressed yet. Corin looked at the lighthouse as if it had insulted him. "Why?" Officer Dupre asked. "Are you in a crawl space with a multi-tool?" Corin said he wanted to get out of the rain. He said he saw the back door wasn't fully latched. He said he knocked and no one answered. He said he stepped inside to be out of the weather. He said he heard children and then realized he had made a mistake and was trying to hide until he could unmake it. He said he had not gone near the bedrooms. He said he had not taken anything. He said most lies are just a breath away from the truth if you hold the breath long enough. The doorbell camera proved he had never rung. The back door, which Ione had locked after the raccoon, had not been forced, which meant the multi-tool had met the strike plate and learned a new way to talk. The thin condensation on the latch proved his face had been inches from the brass, as if he were listening through metal to weigh his chances. The damp hair on the hallway floor did not match Ione or the children. It matched Corin. The officers did not say poetry out loud, but sometimes evidence makes a poem whether or not you want it. Rowan and Maeve arrived at 10:28, windblown and wet, faces open with fear, and then with the specific relief parents make when they count the number of children and find the number unchanged. Maeve thanked Ione, then thanked Officer Dupre, then thanked the kettle for existing because it gave her hands something to do. Rowan walked to the base of the main stairs and looked up at the crawlspace door and put his hand on the newel post like a man greeting an old friend, and apologized under his breath to the house for not knowing it needed him tonight. The rain slowed. The streetlight outside defined every leaf as if auditioning them for a brighter job. Corin Vale sat at the kitchen table and looked smaller and then larger and then smaller again, the way a person does when they realize they have chosen a story they cannot revise. He asked for a lawyer then, as was his right, and the night shifted into a new shape with paperwork and phone calls and the sound of zippers on evidence bags. Later, after the officers had gone and the house had been put back in order with all the rituals humans use to convince themselves the world is knowable, Rowan stood on the porch and stared at the street. A car hissed by, tires whispering on wet asphalt. Somewhere, a train declared itself. He turned when Ione stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and the brittle, beautiful calm people make after the danger has taken its hands off their shoulders. He said thank you a dozen ways that did not use the word thank. She said, of course a dozen ways. That meant I am shaking on the inside, but I am still here. Maeve joined them, the porch light warming the edges of her hair, and the 3 of them stood in a small triangle like a warning sign no one else would read. When Maeve spoke, her voice had a new floor under it. We will change the locks. We will reinforce that door. We will move the postcard basket. We will install a sensor that turns on a light at the slightest motion. We will do the things that let us sleep. Ione nodded and did not say that sleep would come with its own sounds now. The sound of a breath behind a door. The sound of a latch fogging. The sound of a floorboard speaking the truth. There is a detail the police report will not mention, because police reports must make simple lines out of crooked nights. At 9:59, after sending the text to the wrong chat and before calling emergency services, Ione leaned her forehead against the cool plaster of the stairwell for the space of 1 heartbeat. She whispered something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a promise. Okay, if someone is up there, I will not be the person who opens the door and invites them in. I will be the person who names the danger out loud. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Not bravery that charges, but the steadiness that refuses to be tricked into being polite to danger. The next morning, the November sky tried on a bland blue and liked it. The town of Larkspur went back to the work of a Saturday. Kids in hoodies kicked at leaf piles. The bakery line wrapped twice around the counter. A woman in a gray coat standing by the river thought the water sounded like someone ripping silk very slowly and wondered who she would tell that to. Ione slept past noon and woke to a peanut butter text from Maeve, which read in that shaky grammar of gratitude, "Come by for dinner anytime. And also, I found your denim jacket on the porch swing. And also, there will be pie tonight if you want pie." She smiled and answered with too many thank yous and one yes to pie. She showered longer than she needed to, stood still in the water in a way that made time into a warm curtain, then dressed in gently clean clothes that smelled like detergent and a future. When she stepped outside, the air had that crisp edge. That means the first hard frost has already visited and left behind a postcard of itself on every windshield. Maple Ridge Avenue looked like an old movie taught to speak color. She walked past houses that had their curtains open a little wider than usual, past neighbors who held eye contact just a second longer, the way people do when the story has almost become a myth and they want to remind themselves it is still shaped like a person. On the Harrow's porch, there were new screws in the latch. The crawlspace door upstairs had a length of wood screwed diagonally across it like a stern eyebrow. A small motion sensor had been installed in the hall. It blinked a polite green and then went to sleep. The kids were in socks, sliding across the floor, laughing the laugh that children make the morning after a storm when the yard is new again. Rowan handed Ione a slice of apple pie on a paper plate and said again what he had said the night before, but with the daylight, making his voice warmer. "You kept your head, you called, you stayed steady." That is the whole job sometimes. We will tell people that part when we tell them the story. Not who he was, not what he said, not the smell. We will tell them you named the danger and didn't let it decide your speed. The town told the story in its own ways. The newspaper, which had been saved from extinction by a stubborn editor named Lita Quinn, wrote a piece with the careful headline, "Babysitter's Quick Thinking Leads to Arrest in Overnight Burglary Attempt." The group chat learned, gently from Ione herself, that sometimes jokes congeal into myths, and myths can be mean. At the music venue, a bartender wiped the length of the bar 3 times, then once more, then stopped. At the storage company, a supervisor stared at a stack of moving blankets and tried to add up what the numbers meant about people. There is not a moral here, sharp and so clean it can cut bread. There is not an ending where everyone claps and the house resumes being only a house. There remains a door with a new diagonal board and screws that will loosen over time and be tightened again. There remains a boy who will ask, on a night 2 weeks later when rain drums the gutter, "Can you sing the lighthouse song one more time?" And a girl who will say, not the part where the foghorn sounds, that part sounds like a giant in the crawlspace. There remains a young man named Corin, whose first court date will arrive with a sky the exact color of the alley light, and who will have to decide whether to say the word sorry to the ceiling or to the faces in the room. At 9:58 on some future night, a phone will light in some other kitchen in some other town, and a person will type 3 words spaced out as if their thumbs had to be convinced. Who's upstairs? If you are that person, hear this story as a map of breath. Name the danger, make the call, keep your voice exactly as loud as it needs to be and no louder. Stand where you can see doors and hallways. Carry light. Remember that a latch that fogs is a sentence the house is trying to say. Let the sentence finish. If you are listening from a city, may the traffic outside be ordinary and honest. If you are listening from a farmhouse that knows every creek by its first name, may the wind be the only guest tonight. If you are listening in a small apartment where the neighbor's footsteps already live in your ceiling, may you learn the grammar of each tread so well that the first strange syllable tells you exactly what to do. The babysitter's last text was a question pointed upstairs, but the real end of the story is how she answered all the other questions pointed at her. Will you panic? Will you try to be polite when the moment calls for clear? Will you open a door because silence asked sweetly? She chose no, no, and no. She chose the shape of a steady voice on a thin line. She chose to be the reason the house could go back to being only wood and memory. Some nights, when she passes the Harrows by chance and the porch swing is still, she hears only the rain and the river, and that is enough. Some nights, she hears the old door upstairs settle as the heat kicks on and thinks, with a small smile, that even a house can be taught to breathe more quietly. And on the better nights, every window along Maple Ridge holds a square of light cut, perfect as a fresh slice of pie, and the street keeps its watch, and the children sleep so deep the world could rewrite its rules, and they would wake to the new rules fresh and ready to be memorized. If that happens where you are, tell me when. Tell me what the air smells like. Tell me the hour, spoken slowly so the world cannot run away with it. Tell me if the latch on your upstairs door is dry and dull or a little fogged from someone's breath. Tell me if you are holding a mug with a hairline crack that looks like a river map. Tell me if the house has taught you any of its words. And if your phone lights at 9:58 and the message reads as simple and terrible as a knock, remember the kitchen in Larkspur and the steady girl in the denim jacket, and say out loud to no one and to everyone, not tonight, not on my watch, not in this house.